The basic rule for trial and error is that the errors won't kill you, and trials will give you more options to choose from. We will go through a cartoon version of something called convexity bias or anti-fragility in the next slides. So I'll first introduce you to this grid that we will be using for our decision analysis. So up here is gains, and down here are pains. So if something is placed up on the grid, it means that it's good. And if something is placed down the grid, it means that it's bad. And on the left to right, you have surprises. So how surprised are you, or what would a unexpected events impact be? On the right, you have good unexpected surprises, and on the right, on the left, you have the bad unexpected surprises. And if you would expect a decision or an event to be quite indifferent for you, you would place a dot in the middle of the chart. Let's take an example from something like this. So I'll tell you a story behind this. Very long time ago, when I was doing a student exchange in France, we had the habit of going to bars and partying a lot, and then doing whatever studies we was left over after that priority was taken care of. So once when I was walking home, this is a large city, and it's 4 in the morning, and I'm reasonably not being in a very reasonable state of mind. So there are a couple of people who come up to me and start chatting to me about football in French, and they realize that I don't speak French very well, and so they realize that I'm a tourist or an idiot or both, and walking there alone, and so and one of them manages to take my wallet out of my pocket. And then the other guy shows a pepper spray and tells me not to follow them, and they take off. And I'm like, I'm thinking about, hey, what's all the pain going to be about having to renew my driver's license and all of that kind of stuff? And was thinking that, well, but I've actually I had some training for this, and so why don't I just go and ask to get my wallet back? And yeah, well, in the end, I managed to retrieve my wallet, and what happened was I got my expected outcome, which was a somewhat positive event. But in the large scheme of things, this was obviously a very stupid decision, because if something unexpected would have happened, if I weren't able to act in the situation, or they would have had more people or more weapons, the good surprises that were open to me, they weren't very large. So I was sort of the maximum, the best case scenario was that I will get some gain and avoid the pain of having to renew my driver's license. But if I think about something unexpected bad things that could happen, those are possibly very bad. So if I would continue making this sort of a decision, that would eventually lead to my demise. And the same thing, same sort of a fragile decision is concerned with other types of this called something called ruin risks. So a ruin risk is means it comes from this concept of a gambler's ruin. So a gambler is ruined when he bets everything and loses everything and is not able to return to the game next day. So another example from the societal scale would be a pandemic response, for example. If we continuously would wait and see whether a pandemic is really bad, then we eventually we will face a pandemic that will be extremely bad, and it will have been let to grow too large before we do anything about it. And the climate crisis is the same kind of a situation. And what we call this sort of a curve is concave. So it has a known or bounded gains on the upside, so the positive surprises are bounded, but the losses or the downside is unknown or even unbounded. And the memory rule for this is the base you get when you place eyes on the graph. And what you see here is also that when you go downward and you look at what are the spaces between the dots, you see that they get bigger on the downside. So if you would place these dots here on a line, you would see that the upside gets smaller and smaller increase as you go upwards, and the downside gets bigger and bigger decreases as you go down. So this is a cartoonish version, but I make the point of this concave graph. Let's take another example. So let's say your decision is to go and help your friend move house. You're again expecting there to be some small gain. You will help your friend. There is a very small probability that this would turn out to be a horribly bad decision. It would actually be quite diminishingly rare for something like that to happen, and there's also a very low probability that you will unintendedly do something that is very, very bad for your friend, because in complex systems that we'll talk about later, we often have these unintended consequences where well-meaning actions can create cascades and domino effects that lead to very bad results. But your friend is going to move anyway, with or without your help, and it's likely to be quite okay. But the good surprises, then, they're also, if there are what's the best thing that could happen is basically that you will help your friend move house, and you won't break anything, for example, and that kind of stuff, but it's the small stuff. And the bad surprises are sort of, as we mentioned, very similar. So it's not like you would expect something very bad to happen reasonably, although you might break his favorite cup or something. But you can protect yourself for these kinds of decisions quite reasonably. I mean, these kinds of events, with, for example, being careful. then we have, so that was the robust case, and now we have a third decision category, which uh, would be called anti-fragile. So consider that you're going on a date when you're single. So you might expect to have a reasonably good time, uh, and, uh, uh, and that would be your expected outcome. But on the downside, you don't expect something extremely bad to happen. And if you're being smart, you're meeting in a public place, and you're arranging to meet with a friend or have a call after the date and so forth. So if you're being smart about it, it's pretty unreasonable to think that something extremely bad would take place because of your decision to go on a date. But on the other hand, there might be some extremely good surprises, and the magnitude of these surprises is basically very unknown and possibly unbounded. Maybe they're the love of your life, and or maybe you'll figure out find a new business partner if it's about finding your common interests, and or maybe you're talking to a stranger on a party, and you will find all kinds of these unexpected things that might change your life course forever. And so this is what we call a convex curve, because there are these known or unbounded losses. I mean, known or bounded losses. So we can protect our downside. But on the other hand, for the gains, those are unknown or unbounded. And the decision rule is here again for this. And we can see that here, when you go upward, the spaces between the dots get bigger. And so this is these are the kinds of decisions we would like to do when we're doing trial and error tinkering. So we would want to have our downsides protected and our upsides open. And here are some references if you want to have a look at the more elaborate description of this thing.